Good afternoon. I think we'll get started. I'm Diana Pan. I'm with the Museum of Modern Art and chairing this session. I'm happy to be able to introduce Ching-hsien Wang, who will be talking to us about the Smithsonian Transcription Center and how they've been able to harness the power of crowdsourcing to make historical documents more accessible. Ching-hsien is a project manager at the Collection Systems and Digital Assets Division at the Smithsonian Institute, Office of the CIO. She's been working on this project since its inception from 2003, and her contributions in project management and software development has included multiple library and archival information systems and the Smithsonian Central Collections Search System, which serves 10 million museums, archival and library collection records, and millions of related digital media files. So happy to be able to introduce Ching-hsien, who will talk more about this project.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Given the limited time, I probably will be going through some of the slides very quickly. But feel free to ask me questions if I don't have the time to address it in this session. All right. So today, I think I would like to generally cover about some overview of the Transcription Center project and talk a little bit about the functionality and the user interface of this project. I will cover some crowdsourcing activities and statistics, and finally about how we use the data that we collected and some of the lessons learned while we went through this journey. So the Transcription Center at the Smithsonian is really an online platform that allows us to upload Smithsonian images to the online system and invite the public to help us to transcribe contents for us. This project was launched in 2003, and we have a team of a project manager, which is myself, and we have a project coordinator that basically go between preparing materials, working with staff, and the general crowd, as well as 3 software developers. And the materials are contributed by 15 different Smithsonian organizations. There are 9 archives, 5 Smithsonian museum departments, and the Smithsonian libraries. So the Transcription Center is part of the overall Smithsonian larger digitization effort and distribution system. It's also an important tool for us to reach out to the public. We faced a number of challenges which prompted us to come up with the Transcription Center project. We all know that many of the digitized materials are viewable, but they're not actually searchable. They're just dumb images. And many of the handwriting materials are very difficult to read and understand. And finally, worst of all, many of our collections are actually not accessible in any ways. No catalog records, no images. As far as the public is concerned, those collections do not exist. So our goal is to see if we could do something through the Transcription Center to minimize some of these issues and do a better job of doing a discovery and research and education support. So the type of materials that generally gets put into the Transcription Center, including diaries, field books, endangered language materials, letters, manuscripts, collection objects, yes, collection objects, and specimen labels. And so far, we've uploaded about more than 200,000 pages of documents. And as you can see, the public really is keeping up with us, and they've finished most of the documents already. And we have about 67,000 active participants. That means that they actually logged in and transcribed a couple of, at least a few pages. That's when we consider them active. Now, as I mentioned, there are many different types of materials, and so we need a system that really needs to be very flexible to allow us to do this. So we decided that we're going to have a template-driven system. And what that means is that we can support open general, open text type of format or very structured format materials. So an example of open text template would be something like what's on the screen here. It's long-handed writing and no specific formats. So this example is a diary volume from Charles Francis Hall from the Archive Center at American History Museum. And this handwritten page really is very difficult to read, but the stories and the gruesome stories that's documented in this diary is just highly valuable for research purpose. So Francis Charles Hall was an explorer, and he went to the Greenland 3 different times to search for lost ships. And he documented his conditions, and recently, in 2015 and 16, both of these ships were discovered off of the Canadian coast. So his diary really provided some critical foundation for the research to hunt and found the ship. So these are just some quick examples of the type of things that we considered open text materials. Another type of material format that I'm talking about is those templates that supports very structured formats. And structured format would mean that they may be logbooks and they may be catalog cards. So this particular example is from our Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics in Massachusetts. And there are 75 logbooks containing information about 500,000 photographic glass plates. It was in 1900s that Harvard College Observatory spent about a century photographing the sky. And each time when they took the picture, they would log into this logbook. And 75 logbooks later, all of those information have never been really married together with the glass images. So through this project, we are allowing the metadata to be married together with the actual photographic images, and we plan to build a database to search for those information. Another example of the structured format is something that that's shown on here. It's a numismatic proof sheet collection that was completely a hidden collection without any catalog records, any images. And this collection contains about 54,000 proof sheets of banknotes of different states and local currencies in the US, and that was before the United States had its common money note. And so the information on there is highly structured and complex. So a 3-tab template allowed us to sort of simplify this very complex data sets, and it allows us to separate the bank information, the signatories information, the note details, etc. And the instructions will have something like this that will animate to tell people that you go through one tab at a time and where you should be finding that information on the page. One other example is the Bumblebee project. Smithsonian went through a mass digitization project for another hidden collection, and that is the Bumblebee project from the entomology department in Natural History Museum. And this collection was systematically digitized, and the challenge was that, as you can see on the bottom lower left-hand side, these bees are pinned on top of a tiny little label, and the label contains the scientific information. So there is an assembly line created that have designated specimen transporters, specimen handlers, photographers, and image quality controller. And this tight workflow allows the systematic way of getting the bees out of the drawers, untie from the button, the pin, and also the transcription center is part of that digitization workflow. So similarly, there are specific tabs for the project, for the different fields, and then the transcription center is part of it. Now, talk about the reviewing process. Obviously, if we are going to take these data that collected from the public very seriously, we need to highly control the quality. And one of the things that we did was we built into the workflow so that someone would transcribe a page at a time, and a different reviewer, the system will select, would do the review. And one can have review multiple times until the quality is assured. After the review process is completed, then the Smithsonian staff has an option to go through an approval process. And I say option meaning that it's not required by the system. It is unit-specific decision. Now, engaging the public actually has a very long history at the Smithsonian. The first secretary ever for the Smithsonian, back in 1846, started a crowdsource project. He networked about 352 volunteer observers, and they were tracking and reporting weather conditions, tornadoes, via telegraph. And the secretary cultivated this relationship with volunteers by writing close to 5,000 letters a year. Today, we carry on that tradition by cultivating our network of volunteers, close to 1,600 active participants, through social media communication tools or Google Hangout sessions. And we use those to tackle difficult projects or just simply reward the volunteers and giving them a real-time connection with us. Some interesting statistics. We reached more than 1 million saved activities just in 3 years of time. And interestingly, we have a small group of super users, 14 of them in all, that represents only 0.2% of our volunteers that has done significant amount, 38% of the work. Our next group of volunteers, which is 23 of them, contributed, I forgot to mention that the top group has done 84,000 to 10,000 saves each. The next group of volunteers did 10,000 to 5,000 saves each. And the largest group that actually spent on the system but didn't do majority of the work are those about 3,400 of them that done less than 9 saves. But collectively, though, they have done tremendous amount of work for us. We also use Google Analytics to track the activities, and this shows a very similar picture that I just described using our local statistics. A large percentage of the users spend only less than 10 seconds on the system and bounce right off, but there are about over 100,000 sessions. And in those volunteers, they spend 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, or even more time on the system, and they viewed over 1.5 million pages. So it is really that last group that did most of the work. These volunteers are extremely dedicated, and the quality of their work is really good. Comparing to OCR error rates, and their quality of work is far better. And we attribute the low error rate to the dedication of our volunteers, and at the same time, it's the workflow support that enforces the anonymous review process that helps the quality. our volunteers really do far more than we ask them to do. Initially, we just thought that if they could help us to transcribe, then that would be great. But in fact, not only do they transcribe for us in great high quality, they also start making connections that we didn't even realize ourselves. So for example, we have field books collections that actually, they would identify the field book from the Smithsonian archives and linking what's documented in the field book to the actual botanical specimens that we also have put online from the from Natural History Museum. And for example, they also find a woman scientist that been documented in the field book, and they create Wikipedia articles about them together in conjunction with the Smithsonian-hosted Wikipedia editathon. Some volunteers even gone beyond that, and they started making bird observations from the field books that we have with the eBird website from Cornell University and making that connection. So they are more than just simple transcribers. The system is growing larger. We have more and more projects going in. When I say project, it's jargon that we use for. Usually it means a logical group of images together that make sense. So for example, a diary may have 100 pages. So those 100 images would be input into the transcription center as a project. We now have several thousand of these projects. So we have an administrative module that would help our staff to manage importing the projects, editing the project descriptions, starting the projects, staging them, releasing them, suppressing certain assets, or review, bulk change, or export these projects. So the administrative module is very critical to this system. Now, with the more than 200,000 pages that we have collected, what are we going to do with them? We made sure that as soon as a project is completed, we create a PDF file and make it downloadable right on the project page. We also make sure that the transcribed texts are indexed together in the Central Smithsonian Collection Search Center, which contains about 10 million Smithsonian objects. And in addition, we create catalog records when it's fitting to increase access that way. So this is an example where a project has been completed, and immediately you see that it's circled that says download PDF. And so people can actually just click and download the PDF. And let me just very quickly show you what this PDF look like. On the left-hand side, you see the transcribed text, and on the right-hand side is the actual image. So also, I'm showing you the statistics. In 3 years, you see the chart of downloading just skyrocketed, and people are really using this material. It started out with very low, but then we now have close to 341,000 downloads of these PDF documents. We also make these texts searchable in the Smithsonian's Collection Search Center. If I was to search, this is just one example, belly feather, I would get 4 field books and 1 museum object records. And this is one example. On the bottom, you will see that this particular field book has 4 pages that matches with the belly feather search. So if I click on one of those thumbnails on the bottom, I would be taken to that page so I can start reading. That should increase the usage tremendously. Also, we make sure that if a page has been transcribed and the image is online, we display the transcription text next to the images. So you see that on the right-hand side is the actual image, and on the left-hand lower corner is the readable transcription text. I talked about creating collection catalog records. So far, we've created about 128,000 catalog records. They're from botany records, entomology, numismatic records, and the Smithsonian astrophysics records. And it's very simple. On the right-hand side, each of the project will have an export button. And when the button is pressed, a CSV file or a XML file will be exported. And from there, the catalog records is pushed into the CMS system. When this record is coming through to the Collection Search Center, you notice the highlighted portion of this catalog records that says, transcribed by digital volunteers. We wanted to make sure that we credit those volunteers who's dedicated their time in helping us to create and increase access for our collection. So a few lessons learned that I would like to touch on. There are many others. I think that having a crowdsourced review process fosters an anonymous review, which ensures quality control, because no one really knows, they don't have to worry about hurting somebody's feelings. Also, we instituted certain fields for authority control so that for names and scientific specimen taxonomies, those ones we only provide authorized terms so that they can just simply pick the value. And it's especially important when we create catalog records. Also, we think that having dedicated crowd coordinator is very important because it not only makes the volunteers feel important, it also gives them an immediate response should they have any questions or needed any support. And the other lessons learned is that these projects, the number of images included in each project actually matters. If we have a project that's too large, for example, if it's like 1,000 pages, then it will get slow processed and finished than if it's just 300. So smaller projects makes the user feel that they are almost reaching the goal and they just want to have that extra push to move forward. So the size matters. So in conclusion, we think that plan for a successful crowdsourcing transcription projects have a few things that will help the mindset and move forward. One is that the transcription really should be considered only an extension of the digitization effort. It isn't a separate process. It should be part of it. We also feel that, as I mentioned, having dedicated resources to make sure that we interact with the volunteers and keep up with the volunteers because, as I mentioned, every time when we put some materials online and they seem just to get all completed and gobbled up. So having a dedicated, making sure that we constantly putting materials online, making sure we don't run out is important. We also feel that create a plan that fully utilizes this transcribed data so that they're not just simply collected, but they're actually properly used for discovery purpose and from, open up our hidden collections are important considerations. So that concludes my presentation, and I am open for any questions you may have. Yes?
I noticed you didn't specifically cite which volunteers have transcribed any of the pages, even to say this volunteer transcribed 14 pages of the project.
We do have on our homepage, we have a running handle that shows the volunteer who is working on which page, but for privacy reasons, we do not publicize that information. So if you notice on the right-hand side, latest update, there is a handle, and that is the user's name, but that's only, briefly. You can see this stream is live, but we are very careful about protecting the volunteers' privacy, and therefore, I should say that every volunteer, if we sign in, there is a My Work page. So the individual can go there and look at their total, look at the number of projects they've worked on, and they can sort by date, they can limit it by time range. So if somebody wanted some sort of a statistic, they can see their own statistics. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, yes, please.
What platform are you using for managing all of this? Is it a custom built, or are you building upon tools that already exist? Is it open source?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, this is part of a larger Smithsonian system. So we have it's called Eden Enterprise Digital Asset Network, which is a large repository. But the application, the front-end application is Drupal. The back-end is MySQL to hold the actual collected data. But the indexing and the searching is part of the Central Smithsonian cross-search platform. That's how we are able to search the transcribed data along with any other data, the blogs, the collection records, etc. together.
Thank you, Ching-hsien. Great presentation.